Hello everyone! Today, these four people, which consist of Veha, Valdemar, Mads, and Magnus, will be talking about the great history of Denmark and how we went from the Vikings, this guy, to this. I only have about 5 minutes, so my speaking time is limited, but I will try my absolute finest to fill you people in on the great history of the mighty Denmark.
Let's get ready to rumble!
About 1,200 years ago, in the years between 800 and 900, the Viking Age started. The Vikings were known mainly as raiders, bloodthirsty people, and most of all, pagans or heathens. Now, just to be clear, the Vikings were a big community and Denmark was just a part of this. Norway and Sweden were also Vikings. It's more like Scandinavia were the Vikings than just Denmark. But with that said, Denmark was still a big part of the Vikings. The Danish Vikings were most active in Britain, Ireland, France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy, where they raided, conquered, and settled. Actually, their earliest settlements included sites in Ireland and Normandy. The most famous Danish Viking from the Viking Age is probably Harald Bluetooth. Harald were born 911 years after Christ, and just about 70 years later, in year 980, a German missionary who, according to legend, survived on an ordeal by fire, and this convinced Harald to convert to Christianity. So now Denmark was a Christian country, whereas before they believed in the northern gods like Odin, Thor, Loki, all of those people from the Marvel movies. This was a huge turning point for Denmark since it moved Denmark forward. About 300 years after the Viking Age ended, in the mid-1520s, the early modern Denmark was introduced, aka the Reformation. The church ruled most of the world at this time, and in Denmark the Catholic Church started out ruling, but then people became dissatisfied with the Catholic Church.
What the Richard?
And later on, Denmark became a fully Lutheran Christian country. And if you don't know who Luther was, well, in short, he started the Protestant Church. Between the years 1650 and 1750, there was a bunch of wars that in the end of the 17th century turned Denmark from basically ruling a big part of Sweden and Norway to suddenly only ruling the country of Denmark, which Valdemar will talk a bit more about. After the loss of territory to Sweden, Denmark's population rose to 700,000 in 1720, and by 1807 it had risen to 978,000. Denmark still had a lot of settlements around the world, for example on Iceland and Greenland is actually still a part of the Danish Empire. In the 1830s, Denmark became very liberal, and the 5th of June 1849, Denmark's constitution was created. In 1864, Denmark lost even more of its country. The part of Denmark called Schleswig-Holstein at that moment was now a part of Germany. Okay, just a little information before we move on. In Denmark, we have these parties that all have different views on how to rule Denmark. We have 13 different parties, and then one ends up like kind of ruling the country, like in wide terms. It's not they don't actually rule the country like a dictator. So in the early 20th century, again said in wide terms, the first of these parties were created. And then the First and the Second World War rolled around, and Denmark, well, it wasn't really a big part of all that. For example, USA had a lot more influence on the Second World War and the First World War. Hitler actually offered a non-aggression pact to Scandinavia, but then Germany occupied Denmark nevertheless. After the Second World War, Denmark established more political reforms in Denmark, and in 1948, Denmark became a part of NATO, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And now, in 2019, Denmark's Prime Minister is Lars Løkke Rasmussen, which Veha will be talking more about.